Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
Well, I want to let you know you made a wise choice today. The heat tripped, and they came in this morning. It was 44 degrees in here. And then they turned it back on, and first service warmed up the room for all of you. So you picked the right service. You know the Lord is speaking to you. So well done. Also, if you don't know, each week we have somewhere around 800 to 1,000 people who watch online. And I was just looking a minute ago, and our Wasilla mayor is actually watching right now. So Glenda Ledford, I just wanted to say hi to you. Thanks for tuning in. And I know, anyways, wanted to give her a shout out. She's normally right over here, and I can see her, but she's watching online today in her jammies. So this Hebrews series has been, like I said last week, one of my favorites. Gotten a lot of feedback, and we've covered a lot of ground, but these are our last 2 weeks in Hebrews. But I think the reason that this series has been so impactful is because what Hebrews does is it ties all of this Old Testament narrative, God's commands in the Old Testament, it actually ties it to the New Testament. And what you discover is they aren't two separate stories. It's one big story. It's one meta-narrative. It's a story about God's interaction with humanity. And I think, and I hope for you, there have been numbers of aha moments along the way. Last week, we covered the topic of the shed blood, the Day of Atonement, and the sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. I literally had one of my pastoral staff, I won't say who it is, but it's Patrick Napier, the youth pastor in Palmer, who told me that he almost fainted when he saw the blood that I had on a screen in Palmer. So if you see him at Men's Summit, do not give him a gun. He's got to grow up still. Anyways, and this week we're going to be jumping into a topic that I think is going to be really important to wrap our minds around, especially in light of all the things going on in our world today. But first, I want to start here. I want to start in Homer, Alaska, 2012. Aaron Weiser, my good friend, and I had planted a church in Homer, Church on the Rock, Homer. Still meets in the high school gym there. But in the early days, Aaron and I, as often as we could, at least once a week, would go to lunch together. And routinely, we would go to Safeway. Safeway used to be called Eagle back in the day down there, and they had a deli, and they make great sandwiches. And so we'd go to Safeway, we'd get a sandwich, and then we'd check out and go find someplace to sit and eat and talk about church, about life, about ministry. On this particular day, the gal had made our sandwiches, and the same gal that made our sandwiches had gone over to the register so that we could pay for our sandwiches. And we got up to the register, and she asked a pretty common question. She just said, "Are you guys together?" And I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Are you guys paying together?" And I said, "Can I answer the first question again?" Because I didn't know we were getting asked two questions, and they would be different answers now that I know. We are not together. We're pastors here. Anyways, but we are paying together. It just got weird fast. And it dawned on me that something that I have heard Jonathan Garland say numerous times over the years is this: communication is hard. sometimes you're just not picking up what they're throwing down, or you're answering the wrong question, or they asked the wrong question, which I think was the case in this case. Like, it was just bizarre. But this is actually what's happening for the Hebrew people. God's been trying to communicate a message for a really long time. In fact, he's gone to painstaking detail and even told them that he is doing something specific, and yet here they are, many of them discovering for the very first time what he was actually trying to say. And so I've made several observations over the past few weeks. I want to give you a few of them quickly here. The first one is this, that the Old Testament law illustrated our need for a new kind of covenant. And it also, the priesthood, illuminated our need for a new mediator. The old covenant, the if you will, then I will covenant, we clearly could not keep up our end of the bargain. And what we needed was a new deal cut. The whole sacrificial system was leading us in that direction, but we also discovered that Aaron and the priesthood of his descendants was not sufficient for what we actually need as a mediator. The second observation was this, that just because Israel had been rescued from Egypt did not mean that they had been restored to righteousness or right relationship with God. In other words, God delivered them out of Egypt, which we discover was actually the easy part. Now he's trying to get Egypt out of them. He's trying to bring them back into fellowship with himself, and he's showing them a process through which, if they will have faith, they can experience right relationship with God. But in this whole sacrificial system, as we discovered last week with all the blood that had been shed, what we actually ultimately conclude is this, Hebrews 10, verses 1 through 4. Those sacrifices actually just reminded them of their sin year after year. For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Well, if it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins, then why did God give them the sacrificial system? And this is the third observation. In the Old Testament sacrificial system, God is painting a full picture of redemption. How we are restored to right relationship with him. And so we talked about the Day of Atonement, and on that day there's a sacrificial goat, there's the scapegoat, there's the priest, and then there's the people, the sinners. And what we discover is that Jesus actually fulfills all of the parts. He is the sacrifice whose blood covers over our sins. He's the scapegoat who actually carries our sins away as far as the east is from the west. He's the high priest who steps in and mediates on our behalf, and he is the one who takes our place as the sinner. And he does all of the work. And so what we're discovering through Hebrews is that Jesus is better. If you haven't been paying attention, Jesus is better than the law, the Old Testament law. He's actually a better revelation of what God is actually like. Jesus is better than the angels because he's not just a messenger, he is the message itself. Jesus is better than Moses because he can actually lead us all the way into what was promised. He's better than Aaron as a high priest because he's a sufficient high priest, and his priesthood predates Israel and is preeminent over every other priesthood. And he brings a better covenant than the wilderness covenant, and he's a better sacrifice than any sacrifice that had come before. And this is the observation about those who have actually believed that Jesus has covered all sin for all time, that he's separated us from our sin, that he's taken our place as the sinner, and that he is the one who intercedes on our behalf. If you believe the message of the gospel, that all sin for all time has been covered by Christ, this is how we should respond. If I believe the message of the gospel, I actually run to the Father, not from him, when I need grace and mercy the most. It's actually the mark, it's the reflex, it's the response of the person who's actually believed the message of the gospel is that I don't run from God, I run to God. I can actually run right into the Holy of Holies, right to the mercy seat, because it's actually the only place that I can find grace and mercy to help me when I need it the most. If you believe the message of the gospel, we run to the Father, not from him, when we need him the most. And then the fifth observation is this, that faith is not simply belief. Faith is surrender and trust. If faith were just believing the right set of facts, well, even the demons, according to James, believe that there is one God, and they tremble in his presence, but they are not redeemed. They are not saved. That when it really boils down, what we discover is that faith actually is trust and surrender. Which brings me to my title for this week, and it's When Spidey Gets a Swirly. If you read the church email, which all of you did because you're Christians this week, you'll know a little bit of this story. My mom and dad know this story for sure because the year was 1978. We had just moved to Pryor, Oklahoma from Memphis, Tennessee. We were staying at a dusty little motel while mom and dad were looking for the right house so that we could move in. My dad had taken a job at an industrial park as an engineer with Ralston Purina. Not the dog food one, but the protein powder one back in the day. He'd taken a job there. We're staying in a little hotel, so most of our stuff is in boxes. I don't have access to it, but I've got a couple of my favorite toys with me, and one of those is my Spider-Man action figure. It was a sweet toy. My sister really liked my Spider-Man action figure. In fact, one day I was playing with my Spider-Man action figure, and my sister decided that she was going to do the unthinkable. She was going to ask if she could play with it. Which, of course, you know the answer to that. No, it's mine. She wasn't pleased with that answer. And so when I wasn't paying attention, she snatched up Spider-Man, ran to the bathroom in the motel room, and threw him in the toilet and flushed it. By the time I got in there, he was making laps around the bottom part of the bowl and eventually made his way all the way down the drain. I was shocked and horrified. Spider-Man didn't deserve this. I certainly didn't deserve this. But I could see it on her face. She felt justified. I was enraged, but I was also really disappointed in that moment because in that moment I realized that someone who was one of my heroes, Spider-Man, he couldn't even save himself from a toilet. That's how weak he was. No web came out and attached to the light fixture. Like, he just went down the drain like he had no power at all. I don't know about you. Like, we've all had heroes in our lives, like people we looked to that we ultimately were disappointed by. In fact, I would say this is happening in the church in what almost seems like a daily basis right now. You look around and you see failures and failings, and the question is, how am I supposed to respond when my heroes don't live up to my expectations for them? In Hebrews chapter 11 is often what's referred to as the Heroes' Hall of Faith. It's a list of people who did extraordinary things for God. People who saw giants fall and nations conquered and saw miraculous things happen. And as you read through the list, there are a few things that really stand out to me. And I want to look at those for a few moments because the truth is we're the ones who gave Hebrews 11 the title, the Heroes' Hall of Faith. The author doesn't actually call them heroes. But I want to start here in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. It gives us a definition of what faith is. Faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation. So here's the definition of faith. Faith is actually confidence that the things that we're hoping for, the things that we're believing for, that those things will actually become realities even though we cannot see them right now. He goes on, he says this, by faith we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command and that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. So writing to these Hebrew people, he's saying, listen, we believed the story from the very beginning, from Genesis. He's going all the way back there. What he's identifying is what have we placed our faith in? What is the object of our faith? Well, the object of our faith is God, the creator of heaven and earth. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, the declaration of the Hebrew people and the declaration of the scriptures is that God created supernaturally the world we find ourselves in, and the things we can see now did not come from anything that can be seen. It came from things that cannot be observed. It's always interesting to me when people want to abandon the supernatural from the very beginning of the story. But for the Hebrews, he's saying, listen, this is who we've placed our faith in. It's the God of heaven and of earth. And it begins in his creative power. And then he goes on and he identifies some individuals who displayed faith for us. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. It's interesting. He's going to go through a list. It's almost a genealogy. It's like generation to generation to generation to generation. But he starts with the son of Adam and Eve, not with Adam and Eve. That Abel exercises faith, but why not start with Adam and Eve exercising faith? Because faith is all about confidence and trust in things we cannot see. Adam and Eve walked with God. Unhindered, unfettered relationship face to face in a way that no one else has been able to. Adam and Eve actually saw God and still chose sin. But Abel lives in an entirely different time period. And so Abel exercises faith, makes an offering to God. It's more acceptable than Cain's. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. And this is the first in a long list, because wait, there's more. He goes on to describe how all these patriarchs and matriarchs that the Hebrew people are looking to as heroes, how each one of them displayed their faith. Here's the list. By faith, Abel offered a sacrifice. By faith, Enoch walked with God, and then God supernaturally took him out of the world. By faith, Noah built a boat and thus saved his entire family. By faith, Abraham left his own country and he offered a sacrifice of his own son to God when God asked. And Sarah believed God and gave birth to a son. Isaac pronounced blessing on his sons, and Jacob promised blessing for Joseph's sons. And Joseph declared that the people of Israel would be delivered from Egypt one day. In fact, he was so confident that he commanded that when it happens, his bones are to be dug up and taken with them because he wanted to be in the land that God promised. By faith, Moses' parents actually disobeyed Pharaoh and they hid their son for 3 years. By faith, Moses refused to be known as Pharaoh's grandson and thus suffered with his people and then left Egypt by faith. And by faith, the people of Israel passed through the sea supernaturally. By faith, they march around the walls of Jericho and see the city taken. And by faith, Rahab, and it puts this little disclaimer in there just so you know who they're talking about. Rahab, you know, the prostitute. By faith, she welcomed in the spies and thus saved her entire family as a result. I want to make 3 observations about this list of heroes of the faith. The first one is this: the object of our faith is actually what matters most. You could have faith in any number of things. You could have faith in nonsensical things, but the reality is that he begins Hebrews 11 by saying, this is the God that we have placed our faith in. And the object of our faith is actually what matters most. The second thing is this: genuine faith always results in action. If you look at the list, they're all doing something. They're building a boat. They're leaving their homeland. They're stepping out in faith to actually take action. And then the third thing is this: our faithful actions are our example we leave for others. It isn't sufficient for someone to simply know what I believe. What they're actually wondering is, how does it affect the way I actually live? What does it look like for my faith to be lived out in the real world? And so Abel is still an example for us today because he obeyed God. Faith shows up in obedience. Which brings me to the hero hermeneutic. There's a really prolific approach to the scriptures, and it's something like this. I'm reading the scriptures to find out who the heroes are in the story. And so David beats Goliath, and so David is a hero in the story. Or Samuel is the sufficient high priest at the time for Israel, and so Samuel is a hero in the story. And the list goes on, and you begin to look at the heroes in the scriptures as our ultimate examples. The problem is this: what you and I ultimately discover is that even those heroes are also failures. We're observing it all over the place right now. People that we've looked to and listened to and read their books. I was cleaning out books on my shelf just the other day, and I realized, yeah, this guy is not walking with the Lord anymore. This came out about this person. Like, I'm looking at my books and thinking, man, this book had an impact in my life, but now what I know about this person, they've fallen from that pedestal. Here's my observation. The problem with the hero hermeneutic is that these same heroes also acted in faithless ways. Here's a challenging thought for you, because as I've been looking through these books, I'm like, oh, so-and-so, I don't think I want to read his book anymore. And yet when I discovered what David did, I didn't say, oh, don't want to read the Psalms anymore. Because they were both faithful and they were faithless at times. I think it's part of the point that he's making in Hebrews 11. Rather than putting these people up on pedestals, what the scriptures do is the scriptures tell us their whole story. And he deliberately picks people that when you know the rest of their story, you're like, oh, also not by faith. In fact, here would be some of the not by faiths. Noah, after he was delivered and got off the ark, he got drunk and indecently exposed himself to his sons, thus starting a chain reaction of events and a rebellion against God and his family. Or Abraham lies about his wife out of fear. He doesn't trust that God could actually protect them, and he also laughs at God when God tells him that he's going to have a son. And then he sleeps with his wife's handmaiden in order to usurp God's plan, in order to give God a hand in accomplishing, and he is disobedient to the Lord. I was thinking about Sarah. Sarah seems like a great, and then I remembered, oh, she's the one who encouraged the plan with Hagar. And then she also laughed at God when he said that she was going to bear a child, because she's like, clearly you don't know how old I is. And then when God asked her if she laughed, she lied to God about it. And if you just go like Isaac also did the same thing his dad did. He lied about his wife because he was afraid, and then he disregards God's plan. And Jacob is a deceiver and a manipulator. And you want to talk about a dysfunctional family. I mean, Jacob's name is turned into Israel. This is where the people came from, and also allows idolatry in his own household. Rahab, prostitution. And then the people of Israel, we've been reading their story. They got some issues. When you look at these people, what you discover is that it actually isn't about who they are. It's actually about who they placed their faith in. Because they all have failures. The object of our faith is far more important than our personal failures. I don't know what it is that you think maybe has disqualified you from ever being someone of faith or someone God would point out, but I can just tell you when you look at this list, in fact, there's a few more you need to see, because he doesn't have time to talk about what all of them did, so he just throws a few names out there. Here's what he says: and it would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of the fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. By faith, these people did some extraordinary things. And also, not by faith, Gideon. The Lord tells Gideon what to do. Gideon knows it's the Lord, but Gideon needs the Lord to convince him, so he asks for a sign from the Lord. The Lord gives him a sign. Gideon says, could I have another sign? So the Lord gives him another sign. And then Gideon says, maybe just like one more sign, like 3 times his lack of faith. In fact, what we're told in the scriptures is that a perverse generation asks for a sign when a sign has already been given to them. So when someone tells you, hey, you just need to put a fleece before the Lord, it's not always a great idea, and yet God still honors it in Gideon's case. But not just Gideon, you look at Barak. Barak is the one who God told through the prophetess Deborah to go to battle, and he was going to be victorious, and he says, I'm too afraid to do it. How about you lead us into battle? And he loses all of the glory and all of the honor, and someone other than the leader is the one who gets the credit for leading them into the battle. Samson, I don't know, he broke about every vow he ever made. And Samson is a drunkard, a womanizer, and disobedient routinely to God all the way up until almost the moment of his death. I don't know if you even should read the story of Jephthah. If you don't know the story of Jephthah, it's not a great story. Like he has a victory, he returns home, and on his way home, he makes a vow to God. And his vow to God is this: whatever comes out of my house first, I will sacrifice to you. His daughter comes out of the house first when he gets home, and he sacrifices his own daughter. He then goes to lead a civil war in his own nation in which 40,000 plus are killed. Just a little bit of a sidebar apologetic here, because I think people often assume that just because the scriptures tell you what happened, that God approved of what happened. If he doesn't say he disapproved, we are never told that God approves of Jephthah following through with this rash vow. In fact, you could make a strong case that he should never have followed through with it. But these are the people in the list of the heroes' hall of faith. Or how about David? If you don't know, he's an adulterer, he's a premeditated murderer, he's disobedient, and then when his own sons are living in rebellion, he is passive and does not deal with it. Or how about Samuel? I thought Samuel's a pretty great guy, and then I realized that Samuel did the exact same thing that his predecessor, the high priest Eli, did. In fact, Samuel's sons are incredibly rebellious. Listen, you don't have control over how your kids turn out, I get that, but his sons were incredibly rebellious, and then he placed them in leadership in the temple and refused to deal with their sin, which ultimately led the people of Israel to conclude they did not want a priest leading them. They wanted a king like the nations around them, and they now have Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, something God never intended for the people. But here's what's extraordinary to me. The scriptures tell you all of this about them. The Hebrew people that are being written to know all of this about them, and yet they're being listed as people that are examples of faith, which tells me something that I think is really important for you and I, and this is the principle. Your failure is never the final word over your future or your faith. The enemy would love to convince you that when you fall short, when you fail, however public or however private it is, that you no longer have faith, that you no longer could be an example to anyone. And yet David writes many of his psalms from a place of humility and grace and mercy and understanding because of his own failures. But your failure is actually never the final word over your future or your faith. We just sang about it a few moments ago. If you ain't dead, he ain't done. I know ain't isn't a word, but you'll have to get over it. So close, and yet so far. He goes on to describe an entirely different group of people after this. Like, I don't know, but how many of you would like to be the one who led people into battle and you were victorious and you took all of the territory from the enemy? Or you'd love to be the one who led the march around the walls and the walls fell? Or you'd love to be the one who saw extraordinary things done, lions defeated and giants slain? How many of you would love to be that person? There's another list of people that he actually says the world isn't even worthy of this next list of heroes. Here it is. But others were tortured. Yeah, raise your hand if you'd love to get some Okay. Others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Here's the rest. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. Here's the principle. Sometimes earthly victory is not the easily visible, and faithfulness may lead us to fatal outcomes. Sometimes what victory actually looks like is not visible to you and I. And this list of people that he just gave, this list of people, they're actually people that the Hebrews know personally. The others are ones that are written about, the heroes in the hall of faith. But these people, this is what's happening to them at this moment. They are experiencing extreme persecution at the hands of the Romans. They're being turned over to the Romans by their own family members. These are their family, their friends, their co-workers, and their own communities who are suffering and dying because of their faith. It doesn't always look like what you and I would like for it to look like. But here's what he says. Hebrews 11, going back to verse 13. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from afar, a distance, and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. So even those who saw extraordinary things happen, even those individuals did not receive all that had been promised. And those who were experiencing suffering in this world, they were all looking forward to something better. This is my observation. Even those who were prosperous died without taking hold of all that was promised. It's actually far more challenging to be in a position of prosperity, where you have everything you want. You've seen it over and over again. The people who get the perfect home or the perfect job, or they've got all the resources they could ever want, those individuals are often the unhappiest people in the world. And the reason is this, because we actually believe that receiving everything we want in this life would make us happy, and it actually never does. All of these individuals actually believed that they were made for something more than what they were ever going to receive in this life, even if they received really good stuff. And for us, we look around and we say, man, God has blessed me. How do you define God blessing you? How do you know is it because you've got all the financial resources you need, or is it because you've actually been given everything you already need forever in eternity? C.S. Lewis describes it in this way. He says, actually, our desires aren't too strong. The things that lead us into sin and sinful behavior that lead us away from God, it isn't that our desires are too strong. It's actually that they're too weak. And here's how he explains it. It's like we're children living in the slum, and all we've ever experienced is the delight of making mud pies in the streets in the slum. And so we're out making mud pies with our friends, and we're just having a good old time making mud pies in the streets with our friends. And someone comes and offers us a holiday at sea. Anybody in this room would love to be offered a vacation in Hawaii right about now. Okay, I was going to offer one, so just this lady is going to get it because nobody else raised their hands. No, he says, it's like we're making mud pies. We're offered a holiday at sea, but we've never been to the sea. We haven't seen it with our own eyes. We haven't experienced it for ourselves. You tell me how great it is, but I don't know if I can trust you or not. But God has actually offered you a holiday at sea, and you choose to stay in the slum making mud pies. It is not that our desires are too strong. It's actually that they're too weak. We settle for lesser things. We settle for less than what we were created to actually experience, which we will actually experience in eternity. And this is what motivates all of these people, even the ones that receive some of the things they were promised in this life. They're actually looking to a better place. And what happens is when faith exists, even weakness can be turned into strength. When faith exists, even failure can be turned into a future. So here's what he says, Hebrews 11, 32 and 34. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Because we know Gideon's whole story, because we know how scared he was, because we know he was hiding when the Lord came and found him, when Gideon steps into battle and victory comes, Gideon isn't the hero, God is. It's the problem with a hero hermeneutic is we look to the wrong people as our heroes. He goes on to say, all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God had something better coming. He had something better in mind for us so that they, those of old, that they would not reach perfection without us. Here's what he's saying. If they could have been made perfect by their faith, then we wouldn't have needed a Messiah. But they couldn't. They actually had their own weaknesses and their own failures, and God turned those to strength, but we actually needed a hero. Here's the principle. Our faith could not lead to perfection apart from Christ's finished work. Which brings me to, we don't need another hero. And I want to sing it so bad, but I'm not going to. 53 now, I'm all grown up. Hebrews 11, 13. They were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. Listen to this. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God. Did you see the same list I just saw? Like, I think about the stuff that David did. Like, I'm embarrassed all the way to today for the stuff that, like, I read that list of people. In fact, I know some of us. I'm embarrassed for us, myself included. And yet, because of their faith, not because of their perfection, but because of their faith, the God of all the universe is not ashamed to be called your God. Like, I don't know about you, like maybe you've been out with your kids before and they're just a little bit out of control. And somebody's like, are those your kids? And you're like, I think they're with that redheaded lady over there. I saw her talking to them a little while ago, right? They're like, Dad! No, what, you crazy? Kids must have trauma. But God, everything we know about ourselves, and He knows everything, not just our actions, but our private thoughts. Like, He knows all of it, but because of our faith, He is not ashamed to say they're my kids. Because it isn't about us. It's actually about Him. There's only one hero in the story. And here's the crazy thing. That is why God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. These people who are wandering around with no place to call their home, these people who have left their homeland and not seen the promise fulfilled, these people who are wandering in the wilderness and never get to enter the promised land, He actually has already made something better for them because of their faith. This is the principle. Like our faith moves us to obedience, our faith also moves God to action. It may not always be the action that you were hoping for or the action that you thought was best, but it always moves God to action, and we will discover in eternity what God has been up to on our behalf as we live the life of faith. here's what's really crazy. We're going to just dip our toe in the water of Hebrews chapter 12. But next week, we're going to get all the way in here, and we're going to talk about what does it look like to live the life of endurance and who is the model. But I hope what you're discovering is that Jesus is a better hero than any of the heroes in the Heroes Hall of Faith. But here's what it says, Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses. I love it. He says, all of these people I just listed, imagine that entire group of people is sitting up in the gallery watching all of us from heaven. In the first service, I said they were sitting up in the gallows, which was the wrong word. They'd just be hanging around. Anyways, they're sitting up in the gallery watching all of us. And listen, here's what it says. They're cheering for us, but here's who he describes them as. This great cloud of witnesses, not to their faith, but to the life of faith. They're not just watching you. What they are witnesses to is God fulfilling God's promises to them in all of eternity. They're actually witnesses to what the life of faith produces in eternity. And they see it. They're experiencing it. It no longer requires faith for them because they have sight. They've laid eyes on it. And they're saying to you and I, go, go, go. They're cheering for you and I to actually live the life of faith. Here's why. Because we can trust the one who has promised it. So how do I live this life of faith? I'm so glad you asked that question because the very next verse tells you. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion, the hero, the one who won. The champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Every generation before had been waiting for the perfect example, the real hero, and he's shown up, and he's the champion who started this whole thing, and he's also the one who will perfect it in us. And here's the problem. We're always looking around for heroes, but there's only one hero in the story. And if you find a hero here and now, they will let you down eventually. You know why? Because they're just like you. They're just like everyone else who is listed in the Heroes Hall of Faith. The author never calls it the Heroes Hall of Faith. They're just people like us who had faith. And we could observe their life, and they're cheering for us even right now. Here's the question that's been plaguing me for the past couple of weeks, and I've been super excited for today because it gets to plague you for the next couple of weeks now. But they're cheering for us. They've run the race, seated with him. They're watching us run the race by faith. And they've now laid eyes on it. And here's the question, or not. It'll come back, I'm sure. 1, 2, 3, go. Or not. All right, I'll just tell you what the question is. I thought it'd be more fun for you to read it, but you don't have to read it. I'll just tell you the question. If we're surrounded by such a, oh, hey, look at that. In what area of my life would the huge cloud of witnesses be cheering for me to have faith right now? If they're up there, if they're cheering for you and I, what is the area in your life that they're cheering for you to actually have faith right now in this moment? My guess is, as soon as you see the question, you probably have something that comes to mind. Maybe it's in your relationship with your kids. Maybe it's something that God's asked of you when it comes to forgiveness, and you're terrified to do it because you think forgiveness means giving them permission to do it again, and yet you're actually imprisoned by your own bitterness. Maybe it's in your marriage, and he's asking you to believe him again. But I don't know what it is. You do. The Lord does. I know if you were to ask him, he would reveal it to you in an instant. I also know this. It's something right now, and it'll be something new in the future, because this is a life of faith. We will continue to discover things that this crowd of witnesses, they're saying, go, go. You can trust him. You can believe him. You can surrender to him. We promise you it's worth it. Not because we're perfect, but because we met the perfect one. And you can trust the only hero in the whole story, Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. I would encourage you as we go into a time of worship. Part of the reason we put worship on the back end of the message is because we want to give opportunity for you to respond, to hear from the Lord. And I would just encourage you to allow Him to speak to you, to respond to Him, and then to step out in faith in whatever area it is that they're cheering for you to live the life of faith right now. So Jesus, here we are. We're grateful for your word. We're grateful that it's been written down for us. We're grateful for the examples that were laid out in the scriptures, but we're also grateful to hear your voice right here and right now. That you are the one who sticks closer than a brother, that you will never leave us nor forsake us, that you always speak in concert with your word, but you speak to specific situations because you are the one who actually knows what faith looks like in this moment. And so I ask that you would speak to your sons and your daughters as we lift our voices in worship. In Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, amen. Let's worship together.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.